After the First Great War took to the trenches, the fighting got much more brutal. The battlefield was converted to a series of trench attacks, brutal fighting, blind shooting, artillery shell explosions, barbed wire everywhere, and the forbidden no man's land. But one of the most deadly and insidious weapons introduced to the battlefield during World War I were chemical gas weapons. The first intent of the use of chemical weapons was originally to break the stalemate of trench warfare. It was developed and successfully used as a terror weapon meant to install confusion, panic, and casualties among the enemy. There were over 20 different types of gases used during World War I. The first type of gas was used in the first month of the war, August 1914, by the French army against the Germans. They fired tear gas or xylobromide grenades at the German army as an act of desperation to try to stop the German army from advancing through Belgium and northeastern France. Though the French were the first to use chemical warfare during the Great War, the Germans were the ones who used it on a large scale against the enemy. The first gases of the war were only mild irritants or lacrimator, like the tear gas and other irritants. These gases were just meant to confuse the enemy. But as the war progressed, the gases got deadlier. Next came chlorine and phosgene, created by the German scientist Fritz Haber. These were the first deadly gases of the war. The group they were in was called asphyxiate. Chlorine was the first of these gases used. One of the ways it affected the soldiers was it formed hydraulic acid when it came in contact with moisture, like in the eyes and lungs. Another one of the effects it had was it destroyed the respiratory organs of the victim and led to a slow death by asphyxiation. When it is inhaled and comes in contact with the lungs, the asphyxiation causes the lungs to fill up and eventually drown from its own bodily fluid. Then came phosgene. It was twice as deadly as chlorine and more difficult to detect. The one drawback of phosgene was that it sometimes took more than 24 hours to take full deadly effect. To combat this, scientists sometimes mixed equal amounts of the gases, chlorine and phosgene together. One nurse describes the death of one Canadian soldier who was in the trenches and fell victim to chlorine gas attack.
He was sitting on the bed, fighting for breath, his lips plum-colored. He was a magnificent young Canadian past all hope in the asphyxia of chlorine. I shall never forget the look in his eyes as he turned to me and gasped, "I can't die. Is it possible that nothing can be done for me?" It was a horrible death, but as hard as they tried, doctors were unable to find a way of successfully treating chlorine gas poisoning.
Finally, one of the absolute worst and most painful gases of World War I was used on July 17, 1917, prior to the Third Battle of the Ypres. Dichlorethyl sulfide, or as most soldiers know it, mustard gas. Also created by Fritz Haber, this gas was a blistering agent, causing burn-like blisters to form wherever it came in contact with any place even slightly moist. When it was inhaled, it caused the lungs to bleed. When it came in contact with the eyes, it blinded them. Mustard gas is more of a liquid than a gas and is heavier than air. This causes, after it has dispersed, to settle as an oily but still potent liquid on the ground. It can remain active there depending on the weather conditions for days, weeks, or even months. One battlefield nurse, Vera Brattain, stated,
"I wish those people who talk about going on with this war whatever it costs could see the soldiers suffering from mustard gas poisoning. Great mustard-colored blisters, blind eyes, all sticky and stuck together, always fighting for breath, with voices a mere whisper, saying that their throats are closing and they know they will choke."
There was originally a treaty made in 1899 called the Hague Treaty that said you could not use a shell where the sole purpose was to release a toxic gas. To get around this, the Germans mixed the gases into an artillery shell so that the chemical agent was mixed with explosives. But later the Germans started learning them in chemical cylinders so they would release more of the chemical, therefore being more effective, even though this was completely defying the treaty. As I said, there are many more types of gases that were used during the Great War, but these were the ones that were most frequently used. Though in order to use the poison gas effectively to your advantage, you could not just deploy the gas on the battlefield mindlessly.